Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Fast Pass, the history podcast in close to 30 minutes or less. As always, I'm Megan.
Jason.
And I'm Trevor. Thank y'all for tuning in again.
In keeping with our interesting assassinations, today we're going to discuss a dictator of the Dominican Republic, Rafael Trujillo. And let me tell you, he's interesting in a self-hating, horrible, awful, genocidal way. But before we can talk about the assassination, we have to explain some historical context that eventually led to Trujillo's reign. Importantly, the Dominican Republic's very complicated history with Haiti and the United States.
Colonial Santo Domingo, present-day Dominican Republic, hated Colonial Saint-Domingue, present-day Haiti, for a few reasons. Saint-Domingue was a French colony, and Santo Domingo was a Spanish colony. More slaves were forcefully imported to Haiti, leading to a higher slave population than French population. And the successful slave revolt and rebellion which led to a revolution in Saint-Domingue, making it a free country of slaves. In an attempt to free all slaves, Haitians made their way to Santo Domingo and even took over the capital for a bit, which the Spanish were not happy about. Eventually, the Spaniards pushed the Haitians back into Haiti, but this act of overtaking the capital grew a feeling of anti-Haitianismo throughout the Dominican Republic that still exists today. It's like racism to the extreme. Like, people who have any black heritage deny it up and down.
And as for the whole U.S. and the Dominican Republic, at one point the U.S. took over the Dominican Republic, or occupied it, whatever term you would like to use, but they eventually left. That's a very condensed history of what you need to know. Now on to Rafael Trujillo.
Rafael Trujillo was born in San Cristobal on October 24th, 1891. He was one of 10 children, and he grew up in the middle class. Scholars don't think he had much education, if any, but when Trujillo took power, he hired someone to rewrite his family history, so we may never know the real story. When he was younger, he was a part of a gang called the 42. He got a job as a telegraph operator when he turned 16, but lost that job due to gang activities, committing various crimes, and forging a check. His life turned around when he got married to his first wife. He had 3 in total and a mistress in 1916 and had 2 children. He left the gang and his life of crime to be a family man. He got a job as a sugar weigher and eventually even got promoted in 1916 to the policeman of the plantation. His career changed forever in 1919 when he retired from his rural life and joined the U.S. Marines, which, at the time, occupied the Dominican Republic. He trained as an officer for the municipal force and was so good that he quickly rose in the ranks. In 1928, he was named general. This military experience helped further his political ambitions when he agreed to take part in a coup against then-President Felipe Horacio Vázquez Lajara.
The coup was led by Rafael Estrella Urena in March of 1930. Trujillo had made an advance agreement with the conspirators in which he allowed the rebellion to take place so long as he were to become the president at the end of the coup. This is how he became president of the Dominican Republic in 1930, and he was basically the president until his assassination in 1961. When I say basically, I mean there are points in history where he wasn't technically the president, but he led through a series of puppet presidents where he wasn't the quote-unquote president. His rule is considered one of the most brutal in the history of the Americas, meaning North, South, and Central America.
Yeah, and his time in office could really only be described as a reign of terror. On the first anniversary of the coup, Trujillo banned all political parties except for his own, the Dominican Party. And if you're looking to be a dictator, this is pretty much step 1. Adult citizens were strong-armed into joining the party. If they refused, they were arrested. But even those who joined the party were subject to arrest if they appeared in public without membership cards for identification. Government employees were expected to, quote, donate. And I put the air quotes because, they got no choice. But they gotta put 10% of their salary to the national treasury, which Trujillo ran. So basically they're paying Trujillo to exist.
He ran unopposed for re-election in 1934. For this term, he went in on something called self-aggrandizement, which in layman's terms is self-promotion. So he renamed the capital after himself, Ciudad Trujillo, or City Trujillo. He even renamed the province Trujillo. He put his name on the tallest mountain in the country. Cars had license plates that read Viva Trujillo and Año de Benefactor de la Patria, or Year of the Benefactor of the Nation. Churches were required to post a sign that said, God in heaven, Trujillo on earth.
Thing is, people really loved him. Now, some of this was definitely due to brainwashing and propaganda and stuff like that, but there were still people out there who just loved him for what he did for the country. And to his credit, he did get the country back on track, and he slashed the debt. He gave jobs to people that needed them, because he owned most of the businesses in the DR, and that seemed to bring order back to the nation. To quote Julian Perez from an interview he gave in 1993, quote, "A black legend has been created around Trujillo. In order to judge him, it is necessary to know what was here when he came to power. This was a very savage, very wild, and backward country. We had just emerged from an occupation that had come to pacify and disarm because the country was in constant war. A political catastrophe, which made for poverty because the countryside was full of bandits and no one could work and everyone wanted a political position. Trujillo did away with the political disaster. He did away with the disorder and put everyone to work. People preferred to sacrifice some of their liberty so that the country could rise above the state of anarchy." End quote.
Now, when he was up for his legal third term in 1938, he declined, saying, quote, "I voluntarily, and against the wishes of the people, refused to re-elect to the high office." End quote. He did handpick his successor, 71-year-old Jacinto Bienvenido Peinado. This was the first of the puppet presidencies. In 1940, Jacinto was succeeded by Manuel de Jesus Troncoso de la Concha. But in 1942, Trujillo missed the power, and so he took the presidency again and lengthened the term limits by 1 year. His brother, Hector Trujillo, then took over for a while, but Trujillo took power again in 1960 until his death.
And he ruled with an iron fist, killing some 50,000 people, and that's a conservative estimate, across 3 decades, with Johnny Abes Garcia, who is described as bloodthirsty in every article about him, at his side as the head of the SIM, or the Military Intelligence Service. It was the secret police of the nation. Johnny Abes Garcia was as ruthless as Trujillo and would do whatever Trujillo commanded, kill whoever he wanted him to kill. People who opposed Trujillo literally disappeared, and it's said that he fed their bodies to the sharks. Some of Trujillo's more horrible acts actually made newspaper headlines outside of the country, like his Parsley Massacre.
The Parsley Massacre was fueled by that anti-Haitianismo sentiment we talked about before. On October 2nd, 1937, Trujillo ordered the eradication of all Haitian immigrants living in all districts of the Dominican Republic that bordered Haiti. But Dominican citizens of Haitian descent were also targeted and murdered. He said that, quote, "To the Dominicans who were complaining of the depredations by the Haitians living among them, thefts of cattle, provisions, fruit, etc., and were thus prevented from enjoying in peace the product of their labor, I have responded, I will fix this." End quote.
Yeah, so his method of fixing this, it was genocide. Over the next 5 to 8 days, at least 20,000, but estimates as high as 30,000 Haitians were murdered by the Dominican army, mostly by machetes, to sell the government story that Dominican farmers started the, quote, patriotic riot against the Haitians killing cattle. Some estimates are even higher than this. The Haitians who tried desperately to cross back into Haiti by going across the river near Loma de Cabrera were murdered too. That river is now known as Massacre River. Trujillo tried to blame this military exploit on the Dominican people, some leader he is, but the U.S. was not happy with them. Trujillo was then ordered to pay $525,000, about $9 million in today's money, in reparations to Haiti, or roughly $30 a person, which the Haitian government kept $29.70 for themselves.
Yeesh.
And Trujillo himself was part Haitian. He had a darker complexion than most of his officers, and he would literally cake his face in white powder to seem less Haitian, less black than he was. It was a part of him that he hated for the entirety of his life. He murdered his own people because he didn't want to be seen as black or Haitian. He also had a reputation for driving around the Dominican Republic and sleeping with whatever woman he wanted, and that's not an exaggeration. It didn't matter what age they were, if they were married, if he wanted them, he got them. Sometimes he would send his officers away for business to sleep with their wife in their own bed. This guy was a predator. And now, knowing all of this, of course someone would have assassinated him. Now, there isn't a timeline for his assassination because this was a secret affair and most of the assassins were murdered after the fact. We have to realize here that this is a full-on dictatorship where if you so much as breathed any sort of ill will toward the Generalissimo, he would have you killed. So this needed to be a covert operation.
Trujillo made a lot of enemies while he was Generalissimo, some being his own inner circle. Some guy explained Voldemort to me as a man who hated himself, was afraid of death, and someone that people were afraid to stand up to. And that's a great parallel to Trujillo. On May 30th, 1961, 7 men waited to ambush him as he left San Cristobal, where he kept his young mistresses, to Ciudad Trujillo, the capital he named after himself. 4 people followed him in a car as he drove down the highway, while the other 3 waited further down the road. Shots were fired and a chase ensued. Trujillo's driver slowed, and the rebels decided to swing their car in front of Trujillo's, cutting him off. They started shooting at Trujillo, and Trujillo and his driver started shooting back. The conspirators got out of the car and shot Trujillo, who had also gotten out of the car, and killed him. Trujillo's dead body sat in the middle of the highway. Then, the conspirators took his body into their car and drove it to the home of another conspirator, where they were caught. Just wanted to note here, 3 M1 carbines were found to have been used in the assassination, which was the only, quote, support that the U.S. showed. However, I did look into the declassified documents, and I found that the CIA began shipping weapons to DR after some talks between the U.S. and Antonio Imbert, one of the conspirators. The weapons were shipped in small parts to be assembled later.
Now, there was once a plan to assassinate Trujillo between the CIA and the eventual assassins, but after the whole failed Bay of Pigs in Cuba, the U.S. backed off from this assassination plot because another potentially failed mission would make the U.S. look really bad and incompetent. They didn't want that. So the U.S. and the DR had decent relationships with one another, so they were cool about looking the other way when it came to all the disappearances and human rights violations and such. But the final straw was when Trujillo sponsored an assassination attempt on the president of Venezuela, Romulo Betancourt. See, Trujillo's plot against other countries in Latin America were hindering the CIA's efforts to isolate Castro-controlled Cuba, so it makes sense that they would be involved. However, one of the conspirators who lived, Antonio Imbert Barreas, denied they had any help from the CIA, saying, quote, "We were living in a situation in this country where nobody trusted anybody. In our group, we were convinced that Trujillo was supported by the United States. It would have been madness for us to talk with the Americans about our plan. I guarantee you that the 7 men who went to Avenida George Washington that night had talked to no strangers, no Russians, no Chinese, no Americans, no nobody." End quote.
I think the most interesting part of this whole assassination was the aftermath of it. Now, it's not starting like World War I colossal or anything, but the reaction was crazy nonetheless. So, the assassins. First and most prominent was Antonio de la Maza. He, while in the assassination high, dropped his pistol. Only it wasn't his pistol, it was his friend and co-conspirators, Juan Tomás Díaz. Antonio got involved in the plot because he used to run a sawmill that was owned by Trujillo near Restauración until his brother, Octavio, was framed as a scapegoat in December 1956 for the murder of Gerald Lester Murphy. Murphy was an anti-Trujillo agitator who fled the DR when he was told Trujillo wanted him dead. He fled to the U.S. and taught at Columbia, where he continued to speak out against Trujillo, but to a larger audience. Octavio de la Maza was a pilot that allegedly helped kidnap Murphy and bring him back to the DR, where he was either boiled alive or fed to sharks. Octavio hanged himself in jail in 1957, but it was later found that his suicide note was, in fact, forged. For Antonio, it was all about revenge and ensuring nobody else went through with what he went through. Trujillo's intelligence service quickly found them and killed them both on June 4th. Now, on June 2nd, another conspirator, Amado Garcia Guerrero, who was an army officer in charge of Trujillo's itinerary, was found and killed. He got into the plot because Trujillo had forbidden him from marrying the woman he loved, who was the sister to what Trujillo deemed was a communist rebel. Then, to add insult to injury, Trujillo had ordered Garcia to personally execute a prisoner that was held in army custody. He didn't know who it was at the time, but after he killed him, Trujillo told him it was Rengel, the brother of the woman he wasn't allowed to marry. And from that day on, he vowed, "I'ma kill Trujillo."
Other people who were involved were Luis Amayana Tío, Luis Manuel Caceres Miguel, Pedro Livio Sedeno Herrera, Modesto Diaz Quesada, Salvador Estrella Sadala, Antonio Embert Barrera, and Antonio Tejada Pimentel. The conspirators were unable to coordinate a follow-up plan to seize control of the government, so Trujillo's son assumed the role of president. Every single person except for Barrera and Amayana were captured and executed months later on November 18th, 1961, in what is called the Hacienda Maria Massacre. In those months before the execution, they were held in jail, tortured by Johnny Abes to give up more and more names, and once the names were given up, they kept being tortured. It was a fate worse than death.
Antonio Imbert Barrera hated Trujillo for removing him as the governor of Puerto Plata in 1940. He held that grudge for 2 decades until he killed Trujillo. He evaded capture after the assassination by escaping the manhunt. He was later hailed a national hero. Later on, he was shot by Trujillo loyalists in 1967, but survived and drove himself to the hospital. So, pretty much these people gave up their lives to better their country, and most of them were brutally murdered and tortured for it.
And now, as for the country, basically the co-conspirators were clever because they had planned with Joaquin Balaguer that he was to take over the country. Because he was the president under Trujillo, it was supposed to be an easy transition. But he tried to detransition out of the Trujillo regime way too fast, and a coup happened against him in 1962. He fled to the United States. And the rest is history.
Thank you all for joining us for this episode of Fast Past. This one's a bit dark, but life and history can also be a bit dark. Don't forget to join us for the After the Pod. We have thoughts and opinions. Yeah, don't forget to check out our sources, either down below in the description. Check the sources. They are important to know that we are giving you factual evidence. But until then, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.